behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, Smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And Elisha said unto them, This is not the way, neither is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom ye seek. But he led them to Samaria. And it came to pass, when they were come into Samaria, that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. And the king of Israel said unto Elisha, when he saw them, My father, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? And he answered, Thou shalt not smite them. Wouldest thou smite those whom thou hast taken captive with thy sword and with thy bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink, and go to their master. And he prepared great provision for them, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away. And they went to their master, so the bands of Syria came no more into the land of Israel. And so this passage right here, I want to just take a quick second here and just do a little bit of background, just a little bit of refresher background here. So we have I'm gonna call it 3 to 4 main characters in this little passage right here. Obviously we have Elisha. We have what I feel is a new character, which was Elisha's servant. Obviously after what happened with Naaman and the servant Gehazi in the previous chapter, I don't feel like this was still Gehazi. I think Elisha had a new servant right here in chapter number 6. And so, but you have the king of Israel, who is Jehoram, and you have the king of Syria, who is going to be Ben-Hadad. Now, a couple things that I want us to think about is back in 1 Kings chapter 19, if you remember that when Elijah was up there on the mount, and he was done. He's like, God, I'm done. I'm the only one left, and everything you showed me, I'm still done. And God's like, all right, I got something for you to do. I want you to go anoint, and he wanted him to anoint 3 people. He wanted him to anoint Hazael, king of Syria. He wanted him to anoint Jehu, king of Israel, and he wanted him to anoint Elisha. And we've talked about it multiple times that's not what he did. He went and found Elisha, threw his mantle on Elisha, but Hazael and Jehu are still yet to come. They're still yet to come. So eventually we're going to get to both of those whenever Hazael takes over the kingdom from Ben-Hadad, and Jehu is going to take over the kingdom from Jehoram. But that has not happened yet. So while all this chapter right here, chapter number 6, is playing out, again, we talked about this earlier, whenever Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and the king of Edom decided to go out against Moab, how that when Elisha's like, hey, I don't even want to look you in your face. I don't even want to see you. I don't even want to look at you in your face. I mean, here is a king that Elisha has the power to say, hey, I'm going to go anoint Jehu, and he's about to be king. Because, I mean, God had already said, this is what I want done, and it was just a matter of it getting done. And so just a little background here, you have these kings right here, and they have no idea that they're living on borrowed time. They're living on borrowed time. God's already said, I'm doing away with those. And so he already said that, hey, I've got someone else that I want. We all know that Jehoram was not going to do what God wanted him to do. He got rid of Baal out of Israel, but he did not leave the sins of Jeroboam. And so you have where Elisha is dealing with these men, but the whole time he's dealing with these men, he knows that at any moment he could anoint these other 2 men king. But that's not what he does. And so you have also in chapter number 5, I want you to think about this, that really the first real dealings of the king of Syria with Elisha was when he sends Naaman, in chapter number 5, that girl gets taken captive, and she's like, would to God that, you were in Israel where there's a prophet, And so the king of Syria finds out about it, and he's like, go on. He said, I'll send this letter to the king of Israel. I'll send that letter to the king of Israel and tell him, hey, I want Naaman healed of his leprosy. And if you remember in verse number 7 of chapter 5, it says, it came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter that he rent his clothes and said, am I a God to kill and make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And so the king of Israel's like, I got nothing for him. I got nothing for him. I can't save a man up from his leprosy. That's impossible. and yet in verse number 8 it says, and it was so when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come unto me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. Now, not only was it he shall know, but the king of Israel found out there was a prophet in Israel, and the king of Syria found out there was a prophet in Israel. And so when you see this passage that we're going through right here, this was not their first dealings with each other. This was not their first. There was a familiarity. There was a familiarity with each other. And so when you have this passage right here, it says that the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, such and such a place shall be my camp. Now, again, I think I've told y'all, but I try to visualize. Like when I'm reading my Bible, I try to visualize it. I try and put myself in the picture right there. And so, I mean, you got to think about this. I mean, it's primitive, it's primitive based off of what we know of warfare today. But back then, the element of surprise, and having a bigger and better force were the two things that were going to cause you to win the fight. Well, guess what? That's probably still a lot true today. It's a lot more complicated today. There's a lot more technology today, and so it's a lot harder to develop the element of surprise. But you can still be bigger and badder. And so anyway, so here the king of Syria is like, we're going to go war against Israel. We're going to go fight against Israel, but we're not just going to make a big announcement about it. We're not going to call CNN and Fox News and tell CNN and Fox News that, hey, we're about to do something here. It's going to be a sneak attack. It's going to be we're going to assemble, and I don't know how they did it. I mean, maybe just a little band come from here and a little band come from here and a little band come from here, and it wasn't this giant group marching through the countryside. You know what I mean? I mean, you get one giant group marching through the countryside, they're not there to pick flowers, and they're not. That's not what they're there for. You get a giant group of men. Well, you're like, hey, we got a problem here. These men have to be on the warpath. They don't speak our language. They don't speak our language. They don't look like us, and they look like they spend most of their days, doing push-ups and sit-ups and chin-ups all day. This is not a group from the National Audubon Society out looking to see, flowers and birds. That's not who we have right here. These guys are fighters. And so the king of Syria is like, I got this great idea. I've got some intelligence. I've got some intelligence that says that if we go here, there's a good spot for us to hide, Brother Jay. There's a real good spot for us to hide. And I'll guarantee you, if we hide right there, whenever that army of Israel comes through, we're going to get them. And I don't know. I'm not big on plans. I'm not big on making plans, Brother Croft. You can ask my wife. I don't like to make a lot of plans, but I kind of wing it. That's just what my that's what my thing is. I'm more wing it, and we'll see what happens. My wife, she wants it laid out. When we leaving, what time we leaving. How long is it going to take to get there? What are we going to do when we get there? I've tried to break her that, Brother Tyrone, but she's still got it in her. She just likes it, and she's good. She deals with me because she knows I'm probably not going to change. But like I said, but if I do make a plan, I mean, I want to make a good one. I mean, I want it where I know that it's going to work out. I'm going to have it all laid out. I'm going to have it figured out. And I try, like I think I told y'all I had a meeting the other week and up in Tennessee. And when I had that, we were going to have that meeting. So we went in and had a meeting before the meeting. And it was our planning meeting, hey, what are we going to say? What's going to happen? And so I'm like, hey, look, I'm playing like I'm on their side of the table as well. I'm like, okay, well, when you say this is what he's going to say. Now, what are we going to say when you're trying to come up with with all the answers before you actually get up there. That way there's no surprise. You don't want to be surprised. And so here the king of Syria comes up with this plan, and you know how it is when you're the king. I mean, most of the time you just want people to say, yeah, that's the best plan I've ever heard. That's the best plan I've ever heard. That's a great plan. But in a military mindset, you don't want someone just to say, yes, sir, that's the best plan I've ever heard, because you're going to get people killed. You're going to get people killed. If it's not a wise plan, it's not a wise plan. And so the king of Syria is like, and everyone's like, sounds like a great idea to me. Sounds like a great idea to me. But there was one thing, there was one little piece of the equation that he didn't factor in, and that was Elisha. And so had it just been the king of Syria, had it just been the king of Israel, there's a good possibility, Brother Parks, that this king of Syria could have overwhelmed Israel. It's a very good possibility. Because the king of Israel had no idea. And like I said, I mean, if you get caught by the element of surprise, it takes you a minute, and sometimes the battle's already lost before the other teams, even realized they were in a fight. It was just too late. And so you have right here, where the king of Syria is like, I got this great plan, this is what we're going to do. And so in verse number 9 says, the man of God sent and made the king of Israel, saying, beware. So here again, now this is Elisha, and there's no love lost between Elisha and Jehoram. I mean, I didn't go back and read it, but he said in chapter number 3, he said, what have I to do with thee? He said, what have I even to do with thee? And then another time, just a few verses later, he said, were it not for Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't even look at you in the face. He said, I wouldn't even look at you. So there's no love lost here, but Elisha is for Israel, and he doesn't want the king of Israel and the army of Israel defeated whenever he can do something to prevent it. And so Elisha goes and he says, hey, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to understand that the king of Syria has set up this sneak attack on you. And so he said, I'm warning you. Now it's on you. I mean, a lot of times, and I want us to think about that also. Once you're warned, it's on you. If sometimes you'll see someone riding down the road and you look and they got a flat tire, Brother Croft. And sometimes you try and get their attention, and it's funny. I was like, I finally told someone, I said, you know what? I'm just going to get a sign. I never got it, but I said, I'm going to get me a sign, Miss Jimmy, that says flat tire in big letters, and just hold it up. Be like, point at the sign, because you're trying to get them, and they don't understand what in the world you're talking about. They think you might be a terrorist. They think you might be doing something, crazy. But I mean, you see them sometimes. I mean, they got like a half a pound of pressure in that tire. And you have to feel it. If you've ever driven with a flat tire, you get that little sway going whenever you're driving with it, and you have to feel. But sometimes people are just oblivious. They're playing on their cell phone, or they're listening to the radio, and they're just cruising down the road. And they think it's just windy outside. It's not windy outside, but they think it's windy outside, and they're cruising down the road. And you're like, eventually that tire's going to blow out. And it may blow out, and they may be able to just pull off the side of the road, or it may blow out and they do 4 donuts and 3 barrel rolls and end up in a ditch somewhere. And so you're trying to get their attention. But once you warn them, I mean, that's all you can do is warn somebody. That's all you can do. I mean, as a preacher, as a man of God, once you warn them, other than pray for them, you've warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them, and it's up to them. It's up to them to do something about it. So it was up to the king of Israel to say, hey, you know what? I mean, I don't know why he's telling me this. He doesn't even like me. I don't know why he told me this. He really doesn't even like me. But you know what? Maybe, just maybe, what he told me is truth. Maybe what he told me is truth. You know, the king of Syria sent Naaman with leprosy, and it actually worked out where Elisha cured Naaman of leprosy. So maybe he's not as bad a guy as I thought. You know, when we were out there fighting that war and we didn't have any water, even though he was rude to me, we needed water, and he said, this is how we're going to get water. Dig a ditch. You're not going to, it's not going to come how you expect, and get up in the morning, do the morning sacrifice. Next thing you know, we look down, we got water. So you know what? This Elisha guy's pretty much been right about every time, and so maybe I should just listen to him. And so you have the king of Syria, and says, and the man of God sent unto the king of Syria, saying, beware that thou pass not such place, for there the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place. So he said, you know what, boys, let's just, two can play at this game of spies. Two can play at this game, Miss Jimmy. And if they can send in spies and they can spy out a place, I can send in spies to look like them and just figure out, hey, wait a second here. And so they send it down, and look at what the Bible says. It says, which the man of God told him and warned him of, and saved himself there not once nor twice. It sounds like this continued to happen, Brother Parks. The Syrians would go back, and they would think about this, and they're like, all right, something happened here. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. We expected them to come down. We thought we had some good intelligence. We thought we had some good intelligence that they were going to be coming this way, and we had ourselves the perfect little spot set up, and it was just perfect. I mean, militarily, it was perfect. And so, Brother Jay, they're like, all right, we've got some new intelligence, and now we hear that the king and his army, they're going to be over here, so we found this other spot, and we're going to set up over here. It says not once nor twice. Every time they would set up, what would he do? He'd say, hey, king of Israel, hey, just want to let you know that the king of Syria is not over here anymore. He's over there, and he's hiding out, and you better watch, because if you go down that way, he's going to get you. And so not once nor twice, so multiple times this happened. Multiple times it happened. And so in verse number 11, it says, therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled. In verse number 11, he says, hey, look, boys, we got a problem. We have a problem. We got us a real problem here. Well, I mean, I don't understand. And he didn't do it in an accusation. He didn't necessarily do it straight up as an accusation, which is probably how I would have done it. But he did it more in the form of a question, Brother Jay. He did it more in the form of a question. He said, will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? He said, look, one of you boys, I don't know which one of us it is, because he put us in there. One of us is for the king of Israel. One of you boys, every time I come up with a plan, I come up with this great plan. It's a master plan. It's going to be so effective. I mean, I just have these dreams about it at night. I dream about it. I see myself in victory, vanquishing the foe. Here goes the king of Israel and the army of Israel, and us as Syrians, we march right through them. I can just see it in my mind, and every time I get set up and I'm ready to enjoy it, we don't even get to fight. They don't even show up for the fight. Somebody in this group, somebody in this crowd is telling them where we're going to be. And they're like, well, if they're going to be over there, we're not even going to engage. We'll just do something else. And so the king of Israel's like, hey, will you not, somebody, one of you guys needs to confess. Like I said, he seemed pretty calm about it. He actually seemed pretty patient about it. He's like, well, one of y'all show us which one of us is for the king of Israel. One of us in here, whether it's you or you or you or you, one of us is telling them what we're doing. That's the only way. That's the only way possible, because my plan was so good, the intelligence was so good, that it's absolutely impossible for them not to have come through and at least engage us in a fight. And so he says in verse number 12, and one of his servants said, none, my lord. None? What do you mean none? How can it be none? It's impossible for it to be none. No, I'm sorry, but no, it cannot be none. Somebody in this group. And so the servant's like, none, my lord. O king, but Elisha. But Elisha the prophet that is in Israel telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. He's like, say that name one more time. Elisha. Yeah, you know the guy that whenever Naaman had his leprosy and you sent him down, that Elisha. He's like, oh, that Elisha. He didn't even argue. He didn't even say, nope, you're lying. You're making it. You're probably the one. I mean, that's what I would have done. I'd have been like, no, all right, I got it now. I figured it out. You're the one, and you're making an excuse to try and point me in the wrong direction. That's what I would have done, Miss Jimmy. I'd been like, no way, impossible. But it's actually very interesting to me that what happens here is you will actually see that the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, has more respect for Elisha than the king of Israel does. If you read the end of this chapter, the king of Israel is promising to kill Elisha at the end of this chapter. But Ben-Hadad, first he wants to go fetch him. But then later when Ben-Hadad's sick, who does he send? When he is sick, who does he send? Hazael to say, hey, am I going to recover this disease? He sends Hazael to Elisha and says, hey, you know what? The king of Syria, and we talked about this a little last week, the king of Syria, a heathen, understood Elisha and Elisha's role and actually respected Elisha more than the king of Israel does, which is just fascinating to me. It's just fascinating to me that king of Syria actually becomes such a great respecter of Elisha because of what happened to Naaman, because of what happens here, and then later we see it evidenced by whenever he's about to die, he sends and says, hey, I need to know if I'm going to recover. But the king of Israel, who Elisha has saved, this will now be many times because he saved him when they were going out against Moab. And then he saved him whenever he felt like the king of Syria was picking a fight against him over Naaman. And now here we are in this chapter, and it says not once nor twice, and it makes it sound like it was more than once, more than twice, many times that this was happening. So you would think, Brother Parks, that he would say, hey, look, I need to go sit down and have me a real conversation with Elisha. Okay, I'm just been wrong. I've been wrong, and what I'm doing is wrong, but that's not what happens. We see at the end of the chapter where he said, basically, God do so to me if Elisha's still alive when I get done with him. And so you have here the king of Syria is like, hey, look, that Elisha? Yeah, that Elisha. And he's doing what? Yeah, like whatever you tell in your bedchamber, whatever you say in your bedchamber, he's telling to the king of Israel. I don't know that that wouldn't make me feel real good, Brother Jay. As a military man, it would be pretty, it would cause you to really think about a lot of things, because there's not going to be any sneak attacks. They're just not going to be there. I mean, basically, you're just going to have to say, all right, we're just going to have to go find them and just take them on straight on. We're not going to be able to hide. We're not going to be able to ambush them in any way. It's just going to have to be man-on-man fight, and that's it. And even that, Elisha's going to tell them, hey, look, they've given up on any other tactics other than, we're bigger and badder than you are, and we're going to take you on. So you better recruit as many recruits as you can to come fight, because this is how many they're bringing, and this is how many you're going to need. As the king of Israel, you would have to think how valuable that could be. Wouldn't every person, every military general that's ever fought a battle, wouldn't you love to have someone on your side that you could say, hey, look, tell me what's going on, and they can tell you exactly what's going on? Tell me what they're planning, and they tell you exactly what they're planning. If you've studied World War II, there was a lot of the counterintelligence stuff where they were putting false clues out. They were putting out false clues. Before D-Day, they were making it sound like they were going to land somewhere else. Why? Because they didn't want them to know where they were coming, where they were coming, because they don't want them to be able to concentrate their force. So as the king of Israel, you would think this would be the greatest thing ever, and you would think the friendship that should have developed between the king of Israel and Elisha should have been the king of Israel constantly saying, hey, look, what can I do to better myself? What can I do to help myself? What am I doing wrong? It's not what occurs. It's not what occurs. And so the king of Syria is like, hey, he said, and this amuses me. I just get totally amused at this right here. And he said, go and spy where he is. Now again, he just said, whatever you're telling in your bedchamber, he hears. Does he not also believe that as soon as he says, go and spy, that Elisha also knows that he says, hey, they're looking for me? Wouldn't you think so, Chris? I'm just amused, and they do it again here in just a second. So, it's not like, he's like, go and spy and see where he is. As soon as he says go and spy, it's like, boys, don't even waste your time spying. Just don't even waste your time spying. Just go up there and say, hey, look, we're looking for Elisha. Kind of how Naaman did in the previous chapter. Hey, I'm here. I'm supposed to be finding this great prophet that'll heal me. And so instead, he's like, no, go and spy. Go and spy. And so Elisha to me is a man that had a great sense of humor, because he had to chuckle, Brother Jay. He had to chuckle whenever he's like, I can't believe it. I cannot believe that he just said, go and spy. I cannot believe he just said, go and spy. And so he says, go and spy and see where he is. And he finds out that he's in Dothan. And so he finds out that he's in Dothan, and it's funny because, that Dothan is mentioned here, but normally, Elisha he's in Mount Carmel, or he's in Gilgal, or he's in Bethel, or Jericho. He's in other places, but not in Dothan. And so now we have him in Dothan. And so, therefore, in verse number 14, therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host. And Brother Jay, they came and they were beating on their drums and they were making lots of noise. No, it's not what they do. Because it's a sneak attack again. You'd have thought they'd have learned their lesson. Brother Parks. But instead, here they come with a great host, and this time they're not after the king, they're actually after Elisha, and they're coming with this great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. So here it is, they come, and Brother Croft, it's like they didn't learn their lesson, and so they're like, we know where he is, and we're going to do the same thing that we planned to do for the king of Israel, but this time, the prophet, he's not going to know. He's not going to know. Don't you love it when people are just naive? Sometimes your kids, you're playing games with when your kids are real little, and they're just so funny because they're so naive, and you just play along with them because they're like, I can't see you. I can't, and they're sitting right over in the corner and they're giggling like crazy. And you're like, I can't see you. And you're playing hide and seek and you're still counting, and they're over there just giggling like crazy. I can't see you. That's almost what Elisha was doing with the king of Syria here. And the Syrian army was just like, it's fine. Just let them come. It's fine. It's no big deal. Just let them come. I know they're coming. They'd have been just as well off just to come and walk right up to the door. Excuse me, Mr. Elisha, Mr. Prophet, we need to have a word with you. They'd have been just as well off to have done that, Brother Tyrone. But for some reason they thought, they still had that military mindset, and they're like, hey, here's what we're going to do. well, we're going to sneak up on him. We're going to sneak up. We know he's in Dothan, and we know he's not, we know where he's at, and we're just going to, that Dothan's not a very big city. We're going to bring a great host, and it's going to be completely surrounded, and it's going to be absolutely impossible for him to escape. There's no way. It's absolutely impossible. Now, Brother Jay, again, Elisha could have done many things. As soon as he said go and spy, he could have made himself known that he was in Dothan. And as the spy is going back to tell them, hey, he's in Dothan, he could have went to Shunem, to where the Shunammite woman was, where he had a place to stay. He could have went to Mount Carmel, where he seemed to like to go often. He could have went to where the sons of the prophets were. He could have went anywhere. Y'all excuse me. He could have went anywhere. That's not what he chose to do. That's not what he chose to do. He chose to stay. He chose to stay. Why? Because he had so much faith in God. He had so much faith in God that it never even shook him up. It never shook him up in the least that a whole army, a great host of an army is there to at least get him, because he said send and fetch him. So I don't know whether he had a wanted dead or alive on Elisha or not. It almost looked like he's like, I got to talk to this guy. Go get him and get him down here, and I want to see if I can flip him. I want to see if he won't be for Israel anymore. He'll be for Syria. Do you know how well I could use a man like this? He says, go and fetch him. And so they compassed the city at night, and then again, Elisha knew. He knew that those guys were out there. But what's he do, Brother Jay? He lets his servant look out. In verse number 15, it says, and when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And so early in the morning, the servant gets up to do whatever he's going to do, whether it's go get some water or, go get some wood or something to start making something to eat. Whatever it is, he gets up in the morning and he walks outside, Brother Parks, and he looks and he looks and he does a full 360. And everywhere he looks, there's horses and chariots and big old dudes in bad moods. You know what I mean? The whole great host of the Syrian army is compassed this little city of Dothan. And this guy looks out and he's like, yeah, this is not good. And so what's he say to Elisha? He says, the last master, how shall we do? He's like, we got a problem. We got a problem. He said, how shall we do? What are we going to do about this? We're here, and you can't, we'll fight one or two, maybe three, but we ain't fighting a great host. And they got the whole city compassed about. Every gate is compassed. There's no getting out of this. He's like, how shall we do? And so in verse number 17, Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes. He said, just open his eyes. So again, he had his eyes open. But all he could see was the natural. And so Elisha saw more than just the natural. He saw that God was not asleep when this was going on. God was not asleep. God was not ignoring what was going on. When that king of Syria said, go and fetch him, the army of God said, oh, this ought to be interesting. We got something to do today. And so as that Syrian army come marching up for Elisha, it appears like the army of God was also marching right alongside that Syrian army. And when they compassed the city, here comes the army of God, and they are just compassing those that have compassed the city. And they're just sitting out there, and they're just waiting on word. Hey, what are we supposed to do? And Elisha saw it, He was aware of it. He knew exactly what was going on. And he was not shook up one bit about it, Brother Parks. And how many times in our lives, if just our eyes, our spiritual eyes were opened? We have our physical eyes open where we see the problem. But if our spiritual eyes became open, that we saw that, hey, the solution's right on the other side of the problem, and all we have to do is call, God has actually already God has already come up with a solution. If we so choose that that's what's needed, then God's already come up with a solution. How many times in our life do we face a situation where we only look at it through our physical eyes and not our spiritual eyes? And because we don't look at it through our spiritual eyes, we don't realize God's already got the problem solved. God's already got the problem solved. God's already got it handled. He's already got it handled. And all you have to do is pray and ask God to open not your physical eyes, but your spiritual eyes to see, hey, God's already got this. He's already got this. He's already handled this. It's already all but taken care of. All Elisha had to do was say, hey, y'all about to be destroyed. If y'all don't leave out now, you're going to be destroyed. That's all he had to do. And if they said, no, we came to get you and we're going to get you, that army of God was going to take them out. That army of God was going to take them out. I mean, you see, you'll see in the next chapter, you'll see in the next chapter that they figured out there was a problem. They figured out, hey, look, we're not just fighting physical Israel, we're fighting spiritual. We're not just fighting physical, we're fighting spiritual. And they spooked and run off in the next chapter. But in this chapter, here they are, and they have no idea that they're compassed about. That servant couldn't see until Elisha prayed and asked God to open his eyes. But once his eyes were open, look at what he saw. And he said, Lord, I pray thee open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And so he said, hey, open his eyes, and here are those horses, here's those chariots of fire. And one of the things that is a difference between Elijah and Elisha is this moment right here. It's this moment right here where Elijah was like, I'm the only one. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. There's no one else but me. And Elisha walks out where it looks like it's just him and his servant. And he's like, great host of Syria. Doesn't bother me a bit. Why? Because he knew he wasn't the only one left. He knew that God had it handled. He knew that God had it covered. He knew that God knew that day was going to come before the king of Syria ever knew that day was going to come. Before the king of Syria ever said, let's go look at him. God knew that day was going to come. God knew what was going to happen. And he was prepared to handle the situation. And that's the way it is in every one of our lives, if we just learn to trust him. If you just learn to trust him, if you just learn that, you know what, when I'm looking with these physical eyes, it looks pretty bad. When I get my calculator out and I start punching numbers, it comes out in the negative. And I'm like, oh, we can't do this. But you know what? God's calculator works better than your calculator. I mean, every situation you face, God can solve that situation. You have to learn to trust him. You have to learn to believe. You have to have faith to see. You have to have faith that when your eyes are open, to actually believe that, oh, would you look at that? I'm hallucinating. No, he wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't hallucinating. He just got his eyes open to the spiritual, not the physical. And he saw past the physical It doesn't even look like he saw the physical anymore. Once he saw the spiritual, it looks like the physical was not even a problem anymore, because he saw God had the solution. God had already fixed it for them. It was already taken care of. And so here you have the man of God teaching his servant. Again, like I said, I think Elisha did it just as a teachable moment to the servant. Hey, I just want you to see the God that we serve. Not just the God that I serve. I want you to see the God that we serve. That the God that we serve can handle your problems. The God that we serve knows about your problems. The God that we serve has already come up with a solution to your problems. All you have to do is put your faith in him. All you have to do is put your trust in him. All you have to do is, in those times, when I was a kid, I was scared of the dark. I don't know how many kids were like scared of the dark, but when I was a kid, Brother Jay, I was scared of the dark. And we had a split level house. We had a split level house, and so we lived upstairs, and we had some office space downstairs because my dad owned a business. But we had a three-way switch, Brother Croft, and so on our lights for downstairs, and the laundry room was in the far corner of the basement. We had a garage, but right against the far corner, that was where the laundry room was. And it was dark down there. And Brother Jay, I hated to go down there in the dark. I hated to go down there in the dark because you walk down these stairs and there was a room back off of here, and there was a closet that went underneath the stairs. There's a lot of bad stuff under that closet and underneath the stairs. And then there was another room that eventually my sister moved into, but it was just dark down there. And Brother Parks, you know how it is when it's dark and you're scared of the dark. You think up of all kinds of bad things that are down there. And so the way I broke myself of that was I would walk down there in the dark. And instead of turning the light on at the top of the stairs, I would walk down the stairs and worm my way through until I got to the far end to the laundry room and hit the switch right there. And I don't know how long I had to do that, Brother Parks, to get myself over, and I don't remember even how old I was, but I had to continually do that until I finally learned that there were no monsters downstairs. Till my sister moved down, then there was a big monster downstairs. But she watches, so she's watching, and my mom's watching. Hopefully my mom got a chuckle out of that right there. But anyway, so you understand, but when I was walking in the dark, I had to trust that there was nothing there. I had to trust that when I hit that switch, Chris, the light was going to come on. And a lot of times we walk around in the dark. And we just need to learn to trust that God has got everything, every problem that we're going through, God already knows about it. And that God has the switch, and as soon as you're ready, he can turn the light switch on for you, and you can see. It's just the basement. It's just the basement. There's no monsters down here. Nothing's going to get me. And Elisha knew that, and he saw that, and he let his servant in. He let his servant in on the fact that God had it all the time. Thank you.